What you're about to hear is a fictional story designed to entertain, but every power move, every psychological tactic, every unspoken truth hiding in body language, those are real lessons wrapped in drama. This is where storytelling meets strategy. Some people say their life changed in an instant. For Melissa Jackson, it took exactly the time it takes to trip over a wire, fall 5 feet, and land in the lap of the one man in Las Vegas who could read minds without saying a word. Simone Baroni didn't shove her away. He didn't freeze. His tattooed hand locked around her waist, his breath ghosted against her neck, and 3 words left his mouth like a threat wrapped in silk. Don't you dare move. What started as her most humiliating mistake became her most dangerous education. And by the time he was finished teaching her, she wasn't just surviving in his world, she was reshaping it. Before I reveal exactly how an assistant learned to weaponize silence and dismantle empires using nothing but the truth hidden in plain sight, do me a favor. Drop a like on this video and comment below with one word that describes how you handle pressure. I'm building a community of people who think differently, and I want you in it. The wire shouldn't have been there. But Melissa didn't know that yet. The air inside the Sovereign Club's executive suite tasted like expensive cigars and bad intentions. Las Vegas glittered beyond the glass walls, thousands of lights bleeding into the desert night like wounds that never healed. But the real danger wasn't outside. It was sitting around the black marble table, wearing tailored suits and fake smiles. Melissa had been working for Simone Baroni for half a year. Long enough to memorize the rules. Don't interrupt. Don't make eye contact unless spoken to. Don't ever show fear in front of the men who controlled construction contracts, union deals, and the flow of money that kept the Strip's heart beating. Long enough to understand that her boss wasn't just a businessman, he was a psychological surgeon who cut through lies without ever drawing blood. She pushed through the door carrying a tray of crystal glasses filled with scotch older than she was. The conversation died the second her heels touched marble. Every man at the table looked up, but only one set of eyes burned through her skin like infrared tracking heat signatures. Simone's gaze was clinical, methodical, the way a predator measures distance before striking. He sat at the head of the table like gravity itself bent around him, shoulders carved from something harder than muscle. His presence filling the room in a way that had nothing to do with physical space. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, sleeves pushed up past his forearms, revealing dark ink that crawled across his skin in patterns she'd never been close enough to decipher. The tattoos continued up his neck, disappearing beneath his collar and jawline, a roadmap of violence inked directly onto flesh. She'd heard one of the other assistants call him handsome once. Melissa had corrected her immediately. Handsome was safe. Simone Baroni was the opposite of safe. He was the kind of devastating that left permanent damage. She moved clockwise around the table, refilling drinks with the precision of someone who understood that one wrong move in this environment could be fatal. Her pulse hammered, her stomach churned, but her hands stayed steady. That was the first lesson she'd learned working for the broker. Control what you can control, and never let them see you sweat. The union vote is in 72 hours. One of the developers was saying, a barrel-chested man with a voice like gravel and sweat pooling at his temples despite the frigid air conditioning. Costello's people are offering the workers triple what you're paying. They're going to flip. Simone's response came so quietly Melissa almost missed it. Then I suppose the workers will have to make an informed decision. The gentleness in his tone made the threat 10 times worse. She reached his chair. Final stop. Her hands lifted the decanter, angling it toward the glass in front of him. Amber liquid started to pour. Her heel snagged. Something thin. Something that didn't belong. Hidden in the carpet's weave like a trap waiting to spring. Her ankle twisted violently. The tray slipped from her grip. She heard glass shatter before she could process what was happening. Crystal exploding against marble in a spray of liquid and light. Her body lurched forward, hands reaching desperately for the table edge, for anything solid, but she found nothing except him. She crashed into Simone Baroni's lap with enough force to steal the oxygen from her lungs. Her palms slammed against his chest, and beneath the thin fabric of his shirt, she felt something that made her brain short-circuit solid muscle, radiating heat, completely immovable, like hitting a wall disguised as a man. Time fractured. The developers stared. The broken glass glittered like evidence at a crime scene. And Melissa's mind spiraled into a single horrifying thought. I just destroyed everything. But Simone didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't explode the way she expected. Instead, his hand moved with surgical precision. His tattooed fingers wrapped around her waist, locking her in place with a grip that felt like iron wrapped in skin. his thumb pressed against her hip bone, deliberate, possessive, impossible to ignore. Then his mouth found her ear, and his voice cut through the silence like a blade sliding between ribs. "Don't you dare move," not a request. A command delivered in that whisper that could make confessions fall from guilty mouths. Melissa's entire body locked. Every muscle froze. Her heart slammed against her ribcage so violently she was certain he could feel it through the places they were pressed together. But Simone wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on the three men across the table, and she watched something shift in his expression. Something cold and calculating that transformed her mistake into something else entirely. The silence grew teeth, stretched, expanded, became unbearable. The sweating man dragged a hand across his forehead. The thin one's fingers drummed the table. The third man's leg bounced beneath the table like a jackhammer, and Simone saw everything, catalogued every micro-expression, every tell, every crack in their armor, using her body as a shield while he hunted for weakness. The developers left 20 minutes later, not because the deal was done, but because Simone dismissed them with nothing more than a glance and 2 words. "We're finished." They scrambled out like rats, abandoning a sinking ship. And Melissa finally understood why people called him the broker. He didn't negotiate. He dictated terms and waited for the world to bend. The door clicked shut. The silence that followed felt heavier than the one before. Melissa tried to stand, tried to extract herself from his lap and salvage whatever dignity she had left. But Simone's hand tightened on her waist. Not painful. Just firm enough to remind her that she moved when he decided. Not a second sooner. "Stay," he said. And it wasn't a suggestion. He reached past her, fingers closing around the scotch bottle that had somehow survived the chaos. He poured 2 fingers into the glass she'd been trying to fill before gravity betrayed her, then slid it across the table toward the empty chair beside him. "Sit there." She practically fell into the chair, her legs shaking so badly she wasn't sure they'd hold her weight. Simone leaned back, studying her with those dark eyes that saw too much, understood too quickly. He rolled up his sleeves another inch, and she caught a glimpse of more ink symbols and text she couldn't read from this angle. "You're not fired," he said finally, and Melissa's lungs remembered how to function again. "But you are going to answer a question." She nodded because words felt impossible. Her throat was too tight, her mind still replaying the moment her body collided with his, the way his hand had clamped down like he owned every inch of space she occupied. "The 3 men who just left," Simone continued, his voice clinical now, stripped of emotion. "Did you notice anything about them while I held you there?" The question caught her off guard. She'd expected anger, maybe disgust, possibly termination, delivered in cold corporate speak. She hadn't expected him to care about her observations. She swallowed hard, trying to organize thoughts that felt scattered like the broken glass still glittering on the marble. "The big one. The one doing most of the talking." He stopped sweating. Simone went very still. The kind of still that predators achieve right before they strike. "Explain. When I first walked in, his forehead was covered in sweat. Temples too. But after I fell, after you," she couldn't finish that sentence, couldn't name what had happened between them without her face catching fire. "After the disruption, I saw his face. The sweat was gone. He looked relieved." Simone's jaw tightened, not in anger but in something else. Recognition maybe, or respect. He stood abruptly, moving to the window where Vegas spread out below them like a constellation of broken promises. "Do you know what a baseline is, Melissa?" She shook her head, then realized he wasn't looking at her. "No. It's the normal state of a person. How they act when they're comfortable, when they're not under stress. To catch a lie, you need to know someone's baseline first. Then you watch for deviations." He turned, and the city lights behind him made him look like something carved from shadow and neon. That man was sweating because he was nervous about the negotiation. But when you fell, when chaos broke the rhythm of the room, he stopped sweating. "Do you know what that means?" Melissa's mind raced. She thought about the dynamics, the power play, the way Simone had used her body as a weapon without her consent. "He wanted the meeting to end," she said slowly, piecing it together. He was relieved by the interruption. Not just relieved, grateful. Simone moved closer, and Melissa fought the urge to lean back, to put distance between them. That man was more afraid of continuing the negotiation than he was of looking weak in front of his partners. Which tells me he was hiding something. Something he thought I'd find if we kept talking. He stopped directly in front of her chair, towering over her in a way that should have felt threatening but somehow didn't. "I need eyes that see what I miss," he said quietly. "I need someone who notices the details most people ignore. I need you to shadow me. Watch the people I meet with. Tell me what their bodies say when their mouths are lying." Melissa's heart hammered for an entirely different reason now. This wasn't just about keeping her job. This was about stepping into something dangerous. Something that could get her killed or make her indispensable. "Why me?" she whispered. "Because you saw what I suspected but couldn't prove. Because fear makes you observant. And because—" He paused, something shifting in his expression. "Because you're already in this now, whether you want to be or not." It wasn't a choice. Not really. But Melissa heard herself say yes anyway. Heard the word leave her mouth before her brain could fully process what she was agreeing to. Simone's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if smiles could carry that much danger. "Good. We start tomorrow." He walked her to the door, a courtesy that felt surreal after everything that had just happened. Her hand was on the handle when she glanced back at the spot where she'd fallen, where the broken glass still lay scattered across expensive carpet. That's when she saw it. The wire. It wasn't frayed or damaged from age. It was clean cut on both ends, pulled deliberately loose from whatever it had been attached to. Someone had placed it there. On purpose, right where they knew she'd be walking. Melissa's blood turned to ice. She looked at Simone, but he was already watching her, his expression unreadable, and she realized with horrifying clarity that he'd known. He'd known the wire was there. He'd known she would fall. The only question was whether he'd put it there himself, or if someone else had set a trap that he'd simply chosen to exploit. Either way, the message was clear. In Simone Baroni's world, there were no accidents, only opportunities disguised as chaos, and she'd just agreed to learn from the man who orchestrated both. That night, Melissa didn't sleep. She lay in her studio apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying the wire over and over in her mind. The clean cut, the deliberate placement, the way Simone's eyes had tracked her reaction when she noticed it, like he'd been waiting to see if she was smart enough to put the pieces together. By the time her alarm screamed at 6 in the morning, she'd made a decision. If she was going to survive in Simone Baroni's world, she needed to stop thinking like a victim and start thinking like a player. She arrived at the Sovereign Club an hour early. The building felt different in daylight, stripped of the dangerous glamour that neon provided. Just glass and steel and the ghosts of deals made in shadows. Simone's office occupied the entire top floor, and when she stepped off the elevator, he was already there. Standing at the window with his back to her, hands in his pockets, looking like he'd never left. "You're early," he said without turning around. Melissa's throat went dry. She'd prepared a speech, rehearsed questions about the wire and the fall and what game he was playing. But standing there with him silhouetted against the morning light, all her carefully constructed words dissolved. "I want to understand," she said instead. "The wire, the fall, what you did with those men. I want to know how it works." Simone turned, and something flickered in his expression. Approval, maybe, or recognition that she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. "Come here." It wasn't a request. Melissa moved to his desk where he'd pulled up security footage on 3 monitors. Black and white images frozen on the moment right before her heel caught the wire. "Watch," he said, his voice close enough to her ear that she felt the word more than heard it. He pressed play. She watched herself enter the room, watched the developers' faces turn toward her. Then Simone paused the footage, his finger tapping the screen over the barrel-chested man's face. "Look at his forehead. The temples. You see the shine?" Melissa leaned closer. The sweat was visible even in grainy security footage, catching the overhead lights like a beacon. "I see it. That's his baseline under stress. Nervous, uncomfortable. Now watch." He fast-forwarded to the moment of her fall. The tray flying, her body pitching into his lap. Then he froze the frame 5 seconds after she'd landed. The same man's face was different, relaxed, the sweat gone. His shoulders had dropped 2 inches. "He's relieved," Melissa whispered, seeing it now with the cold clarity of replay. More than relieved. Simone's hand came to rest on the desk beside hers, close enough that she could see the tattoos wrapping around his wrist, close enough to feel the heat radiating off his skin. "He's grateful. Look at his hands." She watched Simone rewind, play it again. The man's right hand had been trembling before the fall, subtle, barely noticeable, but there. A tremor that disappeared the moment chaos erupted. "He was about to crack," Simone explained, his voice dropping into that teaching tone that made her spine straighten. Another 10 minutes, and he would have said something he couldn't take back. But your fall gave him an exit, disrupted the pressure, reset the room. Melissa's stomach twisted. So you knew the wire was there. I knew something would happen eventually. He met her eyes, and there was no apology in his gaze, no shame. I've been loosening infrastructure in that suite for 2 weeks. A carpet edge here, a chair leg there. I didn't know who would trigger it or when. I just knew I needed chaos, and I needed it to look accidental. The admission should have made her angry, should have sent her running for the elevator and a life where people didn't weaponize gravity. But instead, Melissa felt something else. Curiosity. The dangerous kind that led people into places they couldn't escape from. Why tell me this? Because you noticed the wire. Simone moved closer, and suddenly the desk felt like the only thing keeping distance between them. Most people see what they want to see. They look at the surface and stop. But you looked deeper. You asked questions. That's a skill, Melissa. One I can teach you to use. His hand lifted, and for one breathless moment she thought he might touch her face. Instead, he gestured to the screens. I need someone who sees what I miss. Someone whose instincts haven't been trained out of them by this world. You spotted that man's relief before I confirmed it. Do you understand how rare that is? She didn't, but she wanted to. Teach me, Melissa said, and the words felt like a contract signed in something more binding than ink. Simone's lips curved. Not quite a smile. More like recognition that he'd won a negotiation she hadn't realized they were having. The baseline, he began, pulling up new footage. Different meetings, different faces. Every person has one. It's how they act when they're comfortable. Their normal patterns of behavior. Spot the baseline, and you can spot the deviation. Spot the deviation, and you own the truth. For the next hour, he walked her through dozens of interactions, pointed out the small tells that betrayed big secrets, the way someone touched their neck when they lied, the direction feet pointed when someone wanted to escape, the micro-expressions that flashed across faces too fast for conscious recognition, but slow enough for trained eyes. Melissa absorbed it all, the concept slotting into place like a native tongue she was finally learning the grammar for. A world where bodies spoke louder than words, and silence revealed more than speeches. By the time Simone closed the last video, her head was spinning with information. There's someone I want you to meet, he said, checking his watch. Head of concierge. He runs the day-to-day operations here. You'll be working closely with him. He led her down 2 floors to an office that somehow managed to feel warmer than the rest of the building. And there, standing behind a desk covered in hospitality schedules and guest requests, was Julian. 30-something, sandy hair, smile that reached his eyes in a way that felt genuine. Everything about him screamed safe harbor in a storm. Melissa! He rounded the desk with the easy confidence of someone who'd never met a stranger. I've heard so much about you. The whole staff is talking about last night's meeting. Are you all right? The concern in his voice felt real. Melissa found herself relaxing despite every instinct Simone had just taught her. I'm fine. Embarrassed, but fine. Please. We've all had moments. Last month I spilled an entire tray of champagne on a Saudi prince. These things happen. Julian's laugh was infectious, and Melissa felt herself smiling despite everything. He spent 20 minutes walking her through the club's operations, making self-deprecating jokes, offering to help her navigate Simone's intensity. By the time she left his office, she felt like she'd found an ally in a building full of predators. But as she walked back toward the elevators that evening, exhausted from a day spent learning to see the invisible, she passed by Julian's office one more time. The lights were dim. Through the frosted glass, she could see his silhouette on the phone. And everything about his posture was wrong, rigid, aggressive, nothing like the easy warmth he'd shown her hours before. Then he laughed, but it wasn't the infectious sound from earlier. This laugh was cold, sharp, the sound of someone who'd just won something. Melissa froze in the hallway, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. Julian shifted, and for just a second, she saw his face in profile. No smile, just calculation. Then he turned, saw her shadow through the glass, and the transformation was instant. The rigid posture melted, the cold laugh died. When he opened the door 2 seconds later, the friendly concierge was back. Melissa, burning the midnight oil? His smile was perfect. His eyes were warm. But Melissa had seen what lived underneath, and now she couldn't unsee it. Just heading out, she managed, forcing herself to smile back. Long day. Tell me about it. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be easier, I promise. He closed the door, and Melissa walked to the elevator on legs that felt disconnected from her body. Inside the car, watching the floors count down, she thought about baselines and deviations, about the person Julian was in the light and the person he became in shadows, and she realized with creeping dread that Simone had been teaching her to spot liars all day. But he'd put her alone in a room with one without any warning. 2 days passed. 2 days of Melissa watching Julian like he was a puzzle she couldn't solve, cataloging his smiles and gestures while her instincts screamed that something was wrong. But she didn't tell Simone. Not yet. Because telling him meant admitting she'd seen something, and she wasn't sure if seeing things was what he wanted or what would get her killed. On the third morning, Simone summoned her to his office. Not the open workspace where assistants shuffled papers and pretended not to eavesdrop. His private sanctum. A massive wall of uninterrupted crystal overlooking the strip, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, and the kind of silence that made confessions inevitable. He was standing at the window when she entered, hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed in a way that somehow made him look more dangerous. "Close the door," he said without turning around. Melissa's pulse kicked. She obeyed, and the click of the latch felt final. Simone turned, studying her with those dark eyes that saw too much. "I owe you the truth about something," he began, and every molecule of air in the room seemed to compress. The wire, the fall. It wasn't an accident. Melissa's stomach dropped. She'd suspected, had spent sleepless nights replaying the moment, but hearing him confirm it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. "You did it on purpose." "I loosened infrastructure throughout that suite," Simone said, his voice clinical, stripped of apology. "The carpet. A chair leg. The wire. I didn't know who would trigger what or when. I just knew I needed chaos, and I needed it to look organic." Melissa's hands clenched at her sides. "You used me. I used physics." He moved closer, and she fought the urge to step back. Chaos is the only time people forget to act. When the script gets torn up, when disorder breaks the pattern, that's when you see who someone really is. "I needed those developers off balance. You provided the disruption. I could have been hurt." The words came out sharper than she intended, anger cutting through the fear. Simone's expression didn't change. "But you weren't. And now you understand something most people never learn. Safety is an illusion. The only real protection is awareness. Knowing the game is rigged means you can rig it back." He said it like it was simple. Like turning people into unwitting weapons was just strategy, not betrayal. And the terrifying part was, Melissa understood. Hated that she understood. "Awareness is survival," he continued, his voice dropping. "I'm teaching you to survive. Question is, are you willing to learn?" She should have walked out. Should have gone back to a world where floors were solid and bosses didn't orchestrate falls. But standing there in his office with Vegas sprawling beneath them, Melissa realized she'd already made her choice the moment she agreed to shadow him. "Teach me," she said, and the words felt like crossing a border she couldn't uncross. Something shifted in Simone's eyes. Not quite approval. More like recognition. "There's a meeting in an hour. Union representative trying to shake me down over fabricated safety violations. You're going to watch him, and you're going to tell me when he's lying." It wasn't a request. Melissa nodded, adrenaline already flooding her system. This was real. This was the test that mattered. The meeting happened in a mid-level conference room. Functional furniture, decent view, nothing like the VIP suite's opulence. The union rep was older, 50s maybe, wearing a suit that had been pressed too many times and confidence that didn't quite reach his eyes. Melissa stood behind Simone's right shoulder, positioned exactly where he'd instructed, close enough to observe every micro-expression, far enough to seem irrelevant. "The workers want hazard pay," the rep began, spreading papers across the table. "Your sites aren't safe. People are getting injured." Simone leaned back, utterly calm. "Show me the inspection reports." The rep's hand moved to his throat, pressed against the hollow between his collarbones like he was trying to protect something vital. "The reports are being finalized, but the complaints are documented." Melissa's eyes locked on that gesture. She'd seen it in the training videos Simone had shown her. The suprasternal notch, a blocking behavior, one of the most primal tells humans had. People touched it when they felt vulnerable, exposed, when lies made them feel like their throat was being threatened. "Finalized by whom?" Simone asked, his voice soft. The rep's hand went to his neck again. Independent contractors. Everything's by the book. Press. Hold. Release. Melissa caught Simone's eye. One small nod. He saw it too. But he wanted confirmation she was tracking the pattern. She nodded back, and something electric passed between them. Partnership. Understanding. The silent language of people who hunted truth together. Simone's posture changed. He leaned forward, invading the rep's space with predatory precision. "Here's what I know," he said, voice dropping to that razor-blade whisper. "Those inspectors were paid to falsify reports. You're here trying to extort money for problems that don't exist, and you're scared I'm going to find out who's funding this operation." The rep's hand flew to his throat, but this time he caught himself mid-gesture. Too late. The tell was burned into the air between them like a brand. "You can't prove. I don't need to prove anything." Simone stood, buttoning his jacket. "You have 72 hours to bring me the real reports and every name attached to this scheme. If you don't, I'll assume Costello sent you, and I'll respond accordingly." The rep left looking like he'd just bet his life and lost. The door closed. Silence crashed over the room. Melissa's hands were trembling from the adrenaline, from the realization that she'd just helped destroy a man's leverage with nothing but observation. Simone turned to her, and the look in his eyes made her forget how to breathe. "You saw it," he said, and there was something in his voice she'd never heard before. Pride, maybe, or hunger. Every time he lied, his hand went to his neck. "The suprasternal notch," Melissa whispered, her voice unsteady. Simone moved closer, and the empty room suddenly felt too small to contain what was building between them. Most people go their entire lives never noticing, but you saw it immediately. He reached out, and Melissa's entire nervous system lit up like a circuit overloading. His fingers brushed her hair, tucking a loose strand behind her ear with a gentleness that contradicted every dangerous thing about him. The touch lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it rewired her understanding of what they were to each other. Not just mentor and student, something more complicated, more dangerous. "Drink?" Simone asked, his hand still hovering near her face, close enough to feel the heat radiating between them. Melissa nodded because words felt impossible. He poured scotch from a crystal decanter on the credenza, handed her a glass. Their fingers brushed during the transfer, and the contact sent electricity racing up her arm. They stood at the window, Vegas glittering below them like a constellation of broken promises. "To seeing what others miss," Simone said, raising his glass. They drank in silence, but the air between them was screaming. His shoulder brushed hers. Neither of them moved away. The distance that had existed between employer and employee was collapsing, and Melissa wasn't sure if she wanted to stop it or accelerate straight into whatever came next. Melissa left the building that night with her mind racing, the taste of scotch still on her tongue. The distance between her and Simone was collapsing faster than she knew how to handle, and as the elevator doors closed, she realized she wasn't sure if she was running away from the danger or straight into it. Melissa didn't sleep that night. She kept seeing Julian's face through the frosted glass, the cold calculation that lived beneath his warmth. By morning, she'd decided to tell Simone everything. But when she arrived at his office, he was already waiting with an expression that made her forget whatever speech she'd prepared. "Tonight," he said without preamble. "Dinner. 8 o'clock. Wear something that makes you feel dangerous." Her stomach flipped. This felt different from the union meeting, from the training sessions. This felt personal. "Where?" she asked, hating how breathless she sounded. "Celestine. I'll have a car pick you up at 7:30. Celestine. The kind of restaurant where reservations took months, and every table held people who controlled cities. Melissa's mind raced. Was this a date? A test? Both? Simone's expression gave her nothing, but something in his eyes made her pulse kick into dangerous territory. She spent the afternoon in a haze of nerves and anticipation. By 7, she was standing in front of her closet staring at the emerald dress she'd bought on impulse months ago but never had the courage to wear. It was elegant but daring, the kind of thing that demanded confidence she wasn't sure she possessed. But Simone had told her to feel dangerous, so she put it on. The silk clung to her curves like it had been designed specifically to make her forget how to breathe normally. She stared at her reflection and barely recognized the woman looking back. The car arrived exactly on time. Black sedan, driver who didn't speak, the kind of smooth precision that screamed Simone's influence. Celestine occupied the top floor of a building that looked like it had been carved from obsidian and ambition. Towering glass panels that vanished into the darkness. Ambient lighting that made everyone look like they belonged in a film noir. Tables spaced far enough apart that conversations stayed private. Simone was already there, standing when she approached. His eyes tracked her movement with an intensity that made her skin flush. He wore all black, tailored perfectly, and the way he looked at her in that dress felt like being touched without permission. He pulled out her chair. She sat, and then her phone buzzed. A text from him, even though he was sitting directly across the table. "Do not speak. Not one word. Watch the room." Melissa's head snapped up. Simone's expression was unreadable, but there was a challenge in his eyes. This wasn't a date. This was an exam, and suddenly the silence between them became something alive, something that pressed against her skin and made every sound too loud. The waiter came. Simone ordered for both of them without consulting her, his voice smooth and commanding. The waiter left. The silence returned, heavier now. Melissa could hear everything. The clink of silverware at nearby tables, the whisper of expensive fabric, her own breathing, which felt too fast, too obvious, and beneath the table, Simone's leg brushed against hers, just barely. Just enough to make her entire nervous system light up like a live wire. She forced herself to focus, to do what he'd taught her, observe, catalog, read the room. Her phone buzzed again. Another text. Table by the window. 2 women. Friends or rivals. Melissa's eyes flicked to the indicated table. 2 women in their 40s, both dressed impeccably, both leaning forward in conversation, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. Their hands stayed in their laps instead of gesturing openly. Classic closed-off body language disguised as intimacy. She typed back. Rivals pretending to be friends. Minimal hand movement. Forced smiles. They're performing closeness, not feeling it. Simone read her response. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. Approval that felt more intoxicating than the wine he'd ordered. The food arrived. Risotto for her, something with truffle for him. They ate in silence, and it was the most intimate thing Melissa had ever experienced. Every movement felt deliberate. Every glance carried weight. When Simone's fingers brushed hers, reaching for his glass, the contact sent electricity racing up her arm. Another text. The couple 3 tables over. Married or affair. Melissa studied them. Older man, younger woman. Their phones were face down on the table, a red flag. They mirrored each other's posture, leaning in with synchronized body language that suggested rapport. But both kept glancing toward the entrance, toward the exit routes, their eyes tracking movement with the hypervigilance of people who expected to be caught. She typed, affair, phones hidden. Mirroring suggests attraction, but door watching suggests guilt. They're waiting for exposure. Simone's jaw tightened, but not from her answer. His phone had buzzed. He looked at the screen, and though his expression didn't change, something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. He turned the phone toward her. A text from an unknown number. Enjoy the risotto. It might be your last. Melissa's blood turned to ice. Someone was watching them. Right now, in this room. Simone's hand moved across the table, covering hers. His grip was firm, grounding, the only solid thing in a world that had just tilted sideways. Don't look around, he said quietly, the first words he'd spoken since they sat down. Stand up slowly. Walk with me. His voice was calm, but beneath the surface, she could feel the predator waking up. They stood, moved toward the exit with the kind of casual precision that suggested they were simply leaving, not fleeing. But Melissa could feel the tension radiating off Simone's body, could see the way his eyes scanned the room with lethal focus. The car was waiting. They slid into the back seat, and the driver pulled away from the curb before the doors even closed. Simone stared out the window, his jaw working like he was grinding steel between his teeth. The leak is in the inner circle, he said finally, his voice low and deadly. Only 3 people knew we'd be at Celestine tonight. He turned to look at her, and the weight of what he wasn't saying crashed over her like a wave. My head of security, my personal attorney, and Julian. Melissa's stomach dropped. Julian, who'd been so helpful, so charming, so perfectly positioned to betray them both. Julian, who she'd watched transform from warmth to calculation in the space between heartbeats. I saw him, she whispered, the words finally breaking free. The other night, on the phone. He wasn't himself. Simone's eyes went dark. Not with surprise, with confirmation. I know, he said quietly. And Melissa realized with creeping horror that Simone had known Julian was the leak all along, which meant tonight wasn't just a test of her observation skills, it was bait, and she'd been the lure without even knowing it. The drive to Simone's penthouse felt like drowning in silence. Melissa sat pressed against the car door, as far from him as the leather interior allowed, her mind racing with the realization that she'd been a chess piece in a game she didn't understand. Simone stared out his window, jaw tight, fingers drumming against his thigh and the only sign of tension his body permitted. When they arrived, he didn't invite her up. He commanded it. "You're staying with me tonight. Not negotiable." His penthouse occupied the building's entire top floor. Sleek minimalism, glass walls, the kind of space that made you feel like you were floating above the city instead of living in it. Simone poured them both whiskey, handed her a glass without asking if she wanted it. "You were bait," Melissa said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "You used me to confirm Julian was the leak." Simone didn't deny it. "I suspected. I needed proof. You gave it to me." The casual admission should have made her furious. Instead, it just made her tired. "What happens now?" "Now we spring the trap." He moved to the window, and the city lights cast shadows across his face that made him look like something carved from night itself. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow, everything changes." But Melissa couldn't sleep. She lay in the guest room staring at the ceiling, listening to Simone move through the penthouse, and wondering when exactly she'd stopped being terrified of him and started being terrified for him. Morning came too fast. Melissa woke to chaos. Her phone was exploding with notifications, news alerts, text messages, social media going nuclear with a story that shouldn't exist. The Baroni accounts were frozen, every cent, gone. The headlines screamed bankruptcy, federal investigation, the fall of the broker. Melissa rushed into the living area where Simone stood, watching 3 monitors simultaneously, his expression carved from stone. "Is it real?" she whispered. "Very real." But his voice held something else, something that sounded dangerously close to satisfaction. They went to the office together. The building was in pandemonium. Staff rushing between floors, phones ringing unanswered, the kind of barely controlled chaos that happened when empires collapsed. And in the center of it all was Julian, playing the role of loyal soldier trying to save a sinking ship. He was in Simone's outer office, feeding documents into an industrial shredder, his face arranged in perfect concern. "Julian," Melissa called, her voice cutting through the noise. He looked up, and his smile was immediate. "Practiced." "Melissa, thank God. Have you heard?" "The accounts. I heard. What are you shredding?" She moved closer, watching his face with the intensity Simone had taught her. Julian's smile never faltered. "Old contracts. Sensitive information. If the feds are coming, we need to protect what we can." Melissa's pulse kicked. She thought about the gold statues in the lobby, the ones she'd passed 100 times without really seeing. Simone had mentioned a gold shipment once, months ago. She'd filed it away as irrelevant, until now. "What about the gold shipment?" she asked casually. "The one from the overseas supplier. Did that clear before the accounts froze?" Julian's pupils exploded. She watched it happen in real time. The black centers of his eyes dilating so fast it looked like someone had flipped a switch. Not from light adjustment, from pure adrenaline flooding his system, the biological response to stress that no amount of training could fully suppress. I'm not sure," Julian stammered, and the smoothness was gone. "Just for a second, just long enough. I'd have to check." His hands kept feeding papers into the shredder, but they were moving faster now. Desperate, Melissa's blood turned to ice. He wasn't protecting Simone. He was destroying evidence of his own theft. "I need to talk to Simone," she said, backing toward the inner office. Julian's smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes anymore. "Of course, he's under a lot of stress. Go easy on him." She practically ran into Simone's office, slamming the door behind her. He was at his desk, utterly calm, like he wasn't watching his empire burn on every screen. "It's Julian," she said, breathless. "I asked about the gold shipment, and his pupils dilated. Massive stress response. He's lying. He's not shredding documents to protect you. He's destroying evidence of the gold he stole," Simone finished quietly. He stood, buttoning his jacket, with the precision of a man preparing for war. "I know." Melissa stared at him. "You know? I've suspected him for 3 weeks. The accounts being frozen? He gestured to the monitors showing financial chaos. I did that. 4 days ago. Moved every cent into physical assets. Gold bullion disguised as decorative statues in the lobby. The bankruptcy as theater. The realization hit her like a physical blow. You wanted to see who would run. And who would try to destroy the evidence of their theft before running? Simone's smile was predatory. Julian's been skimming for months. Small amounts. Untraceable unless you're looking. But when he thought the empire was collapsing, he got greedy. Tried to liquidate the gold shipment before disappearing. I let him think he succeeded. Melissa's mind raced. So the frozen accounts, bait, the news coverage, the federal investigation rumors, all of it. I burned my own kingdom to the ground to catch one rat. We have him, Melissa whispered, something fierce and violent blooming in her chest. Simone's expression darkened. We have him. But he invited friends. That's when the lights went out. Every screen, every phone line. The hum of the elevators dying mid-floor. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. Simone's hand went to his phone. Dead. The security system. Hacked. They were trapped on the top floor with a spy who'd just realized his escape route was closing, and whoever he'd sold them out to was already in the building. Simone moved with the kind of calm that only came from a man who'd prepared for every contingency. He grabbed Melissa's wrist, pulling her toward the emergency stairwell, but the door wouldn't budge. Locked remotely. The service elevator then. It was older. Mechanical override. The kind Julian wouldn't think to disable. They ran down the corridor, red emergency lighting painting everything in shades of blood and shadow. Melissa's heels echoed against marble, too loud, broadcasting their location to anyone listening. The service elevator doors opened with a grinding protest. They slipped inside. Simone jammed the button for the parking garage, and the car lurched downward. For 10 seconds, Melissa let herself believe they'd make it. Then the elevator shuddered. Stopped. Wrong floor. The doors opened on the 3rd level, and standing in the corridor was the barrel-chested developer from the first meeting, the one who'd stopped sweating when she fell. His face was slick with perspiration now, his eyes wild, and his hand was moving toward the inside of his jacket. Simone exploded into motion. He lunged forward, arm cocked back, ready to break the man's reaching arm before whatever weapon he was pulling cleared fabric. But Melissa saw it, the shoulder dip, not the sharp, aggressive drop of someone drawing a holster. Slow, deliberate. The kind of movement someone made when they were reaching for something light, something they wanted you to see. Stop, she screamed. The word ripped from her throat with enough force that Simone froze mid-strike. He looked back at her, confusion and fury warring in his eyes. Melissa pushed past him, and suddenly she was laughing, not from humor, from the sheer audacity of what she was seeing. He wants you to hit him, she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. She pointed at the developer's shoulder. Look at the dip. It's slow, controlled. He's not drawing a weapon. He's drawing a recording device. Simone's eyes narrowed. The developer's hand kept moving, and when it emerged from his jacket, he was holding a phone. Screen facing them. Recording light blinking red. The man's smile was ugly. Triumphant. Assault on video, he said, breathless and eager. With your accounts frozen and federal investigation rumors swirling, one assault charge and you're finished. I just needed you to swing first. Simone straightened slowly, and the transformation was terrifying. The violence drained from his posture, replaced by something colder, more dangerous. He smiled at the camera. Interesting strategy, he said, his voice smooth as silk over razor blades. Unfortunately for you, my associate here is smarter than your entire operation. He buttoned his jacket, adjusted his cuffs, and walked past the developer like he was nothing more than an inconvenience. Tell your employers, the broker sends his regards. They took the stairs. 18 floors in emergency lighting with Melissa's heart trying to punch through her ribcage. By the time they reached Simone's penthouse, her legs were shaking and her lungs burned. Simone locked the door behind them, engaged 3 separate deadbolts, and finally let his shoulders drop. The adrenaline crash hit them both simultaneously. Melissa leaned against the wall, trying to remember how to breathe normally. Simone poured whiskey with hands that weren't quite steady. You saved my life, he said quietly, not looking at her. That recording would have destroyed everything. You taught me to see it. Melissa pushed off the wall, moving toward him on instinct. The shoulder movement, the context, you taught me to read threats. Simone turned, and the look in his eyes made her forget about the hitmen and the hacked security and Julian's betrayal. Made her forget everything except the fact that they were alive and together, and the distance between them felt like the only unbearable thing left in the world. "I didn't teach you to be fearless," he said, his voice rough. "That's all you." He moved toward her, and suddenly they were standing close enough that she could see the faint scar above his eyebrow, close enough to count the rapid pulse beating in his throat. His hand lifted, fingers tracing her jawline with a reverence that contradicted every dangerous thing about him. "I don't need a soldier, Melissa," he whispered. "I need you, exactly as you are." She didn't know who moved first, didn't care. Their mouths collided with the desperation of people who'd just survived death and needed to prove they were still alive. His hands tangled in her hair. Her fingers dug into his shoulders, pulling him closer, needing to erase every inch of space that had existed between them since the moment she'd fallen into his lap. The kiss was fire and fury and everything they'd been holding back since that first night. Simone tasted like whiskey and danger and promises that would probably destroy her. She didn't care. Her back hit the wall. His body pressed against hers, solid and real and alive. They broke apart gasping, foreheads pressed together, breathing each other's air. "Stay," he said, and it wasn't a command. It was a plea. So she stayed. They worked through the night, pulling apart Julian's theft piece by piece, building the case that would bury him. But every few minutes, their hands would brush. Their eyes would meet. The tension that had been building for weeks finally acknowledged and impossibly still growing. Somewhere around 3 a.m, exhaustion won. Simone led her to his bedroom, and she was too tired to protest, too tired to care about propriety or what it meant. She fell asleep in his bed with his arm around her waist and his breath warm against her neck. And for the first time since the wire and the fall and the whole impossible spiral, she felt safe. Morning light woke her. Simone was gone, probably already strategizing their next move. Melissa stretched, her body deliciously sore from yesterday's chaos, and moved to the window. The parking lot spread out below, early shift workers arriving, the normal rhythm of a building that didn't know it was at war. Then she saw him. A man crossing the lot with a distinctive limp, not an injury limp. A gait, specific, deliberate. The kind of walk that came from a leg that had been broken and healed wrong, creating a permanent signature that security analysts use to identify repeat visitors. Melissa's blood turned to ice. She'd seen that walk before. In a security briefing Simone had shown her last week. Not a developer or a rival or a thief. A cleaner. A professional. The kind of person who made problems disappear permanently. And he was walking toward the building's service entrance like he had every right to be there. They'd survived the recorder. Survived Julian's betrayal. But the real threat was just arriving. And Simone didn't know yet. Melissa ran. Barefoot across Simone's penthouse, her heart slamming against her ribs hard enough to crack bone. She found him in his office, already on his phone, his voice low and lethal as he spoke to someone about security protocols. When he saw her face, he ended the call mid-sentence. "What is it?" She told him about the man with the limp. Watched his expression shift from calculated calm to something darker, something that looked like fear, though she'd never seen that emotion on Simone Baroni's face before. "Describe the gate again," he commanded, moving to his laptop. She did. He pulled up security footage, and there it was, the distinctive walk. The professional who'd been flagged in 3 previous incidents, all of them ending with someone disappearing permanently. Simone's jaw tightened. He looked at her, and Melissa saw something in his eyes that made her stomach drop. Not fear for himself, fear for her. "He's here for you," Simone said quietly. "You're the weakness they identified, the leverage they can use against me." The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd become a target not because of anything she'd done, but because of what she meant to him. Because somewhere between the fall and the kiss and all the dangerous moments in between, she'd stopped being expendable. "Then we leave together," she said, already moving toward the bedroom to grab her things. Simone caught her wrist, spinning her back to face him. "No." The word was steel, final. "Simone, I need you to trust me." His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with a tenderness that made her throat close. "Trust me one more time." Then he kissed her. Hard and desperate, and tasting like goodbye. When he pulled back, his expression had transformed into something cold. Something that looked like the man who'd orchestrated chaos and weaponized her fall without apology. He had to break her heart to ensure her heart kept beating. He stormed into the outer office where 2 assistants were stationed, monitoring the building's backup systems. His voice, when he spoke, was loud enough to carry through the entire floor. Loud enough to be heard by anyone listening. "Where the hell is she?" he roared, and Melissa barely had time to process before he was dragging her into the main area by her elbow. His grip was firm but not painful, and something about that careful pressure made her chest ache. "You!" he spat, releasing her so abruptly she stumbled. The 2 assistants stared, wide-eyed. "You were supposed to be an asset. Instead, you're a liability. A weakness I can't afford." Melissa's breath caught. The words were knives, each one designed to cut deeper. "Simone, I don't." He held up a hand, and his eyes were cold, empty. "You were a tool, a useful set of eyes. But this?" He gestured between them, his lip curling with something that looked like disgust. "This was a mistake, my mistake, and I'm done making them." He grabbed her bag from the office, threw it at her feet with enough force that it skidded across the marble. "You're fired. Get out of my building. Get out of my life." His voice echoed through the space, harsh and final. Melissa felt tears burning behind her eyes, felt her heart cracking down the center. One of the assistants moved to escort her out, and she let herself be led because she couldn't see through the blur of humiliation and heartbreak. The elevator ride down felt like drowning. The lobby was a nightmare of concerned looks from staff who'd witnessed her fall from grace, and then she was outside, being pushed into a cab by security who wouldn't meet her eyes. The door slammed. The cab pulled away, and Melissa broke. Tears streamed down her face, her body shaking with sobs she couldn't control. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror, concerned but smart enough not to ask questions. She'd trusted Simone, had let herself believe that what they had was real, that the connection between them meant something beyond strategy and survival. And he'd destroyed her in front of witnesses, made her feel small and used and disposable. But as the cab turned the corner, putting distance between her and the Sovereign Club, something shifted. Melissa replayed the scene, forcing herself to see past the pain, to apply everything Simone had taught her about reading people. His words had been brutal, his tone devastating, but his body had told a different story. When he'd screamed at her, his feet had been pointed directly toward her, not angled away, not positioned for escape, pointed at her with the unconscious orientation of someone who wanted to close distance, not create it. His hands had been clenched into fists at his sides, not pointing at her in accusation, not gesturing with the open palm aggression of someone truly angry. Clenched, held tight against his body in the universal signal of restraint, of someone forcing themselves not to reach out. And when he'd thrown her bag, his shoulder had been tense, the movement controlled, ensuring it landed at her feet and not at her body. Every gesture calculated to create maximum verbal damage while inflicting zero physical harm. He hadn't fired her to hurt her. He'd fired her to save her. To get her out of the building before the hitman arrived. To make her an irrelevant target by publicly severing their connection. To sacrifice whatever they were building together so she would live. The realization crashed over her like a wave, washing away the hurt and leaving something fiercer in its place. Understanding, fury, and the absolute certainty that she wasn't leaving him to face this alone. Melissa wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Her voice when she spoke was steady. "Turn the car around." The driver's eyes met hers in the mirror. "Miss?" I said turn around, now. The cab made a sharp U-turn, tires squealing. Melissa pulled her phone from her bag, already dialing, because Simone Baroni had taught her to read people, to see the truth hiding beneath lies. But she'd learned something he hadn't intended to teach. Sometimes the most dangerous move wasn't walking into the trap. It was refusing to leave someone you loved inside it. The cab screeched to a stop outside the Sovereign Club. Melissa threw cash at the driver and ran, her bare feet slapping against concrete, her heart a war drum in her chest. The building looked normal from the outside, too normal, like nothing inside was burning. But she could feel it, the wrongness, the sense that time was collapsing, and every second she wasted was a second Simone might not have. Security tried to stop her at the entrance. She didn't slow down. "Fire!" she screamed, pointing at nothing. "Third floor, southwest corner." I saw smoke from the street. The guards' training kicked in. They ran toward the stairwells, and Melissa slipped through the chaos she'd just created with words. The lobby was emptying, staff evacuating in orderly lines that proved Simone had drilled disaster protocols into everyone. But Melissa wasn't evacuating. She was climbing. The stairwell was empty. She took the steps 3 at a time, her lungs burning, her mind racing faster than her feet. She had no weapon, no plan. Nothing except the absolute certainty that Simone was in danger, and she was the only person who understood what his body had been screaming while his mouth destroyed her. The executive level was silent, too silent. She moved down the corridor like a ghost, every sense heightened, and that's when she heard it. Voices. Simone's office. The door was closed, but through the frosted glass she could see shapes. 3 figures, 1 sitting, 2 standing. The geometry of a hostage situation. Melissa's hand found the fire alarm on the wall. She didn't hesitate, pulled it with every ounce of strength she had. The sound was apocalyptic, sirens screaming through every floor, strobe lights turning the world into a flickering nightmare. Chaos. Simone had taught her that chaos was a weapon, and now she was using it against the people who'd weaponized it against them. She moved to the side entrance of Simone's office, the one reserved for emergencies, the one most people didn't know existed. The lock was electronic, still functional despite the alarm. She pressed her palm against the biometric reader, praying Simone hadn't revoked her access in the 20 minutes since he'd fired her. The light flashed green. The door clicked open. Melissa slipped inside and immediately dropped behind the leather sofa as her eyes adjusted to the scene. Simone was at his desk, hands flat on the mahogany surface, his face carved from stone. Julian stood to his right, holding a gun with the nervous energy of someone who'd never actually used one. And to the left was the man with the limp, the professional. His weapon was steady, practiced, pointed at Simone's head with the casual precision of someone who'd made this shot 1,000 times. The fire alarm was deafening, but through the chaos, Melissa heard Julian shouting, "Sign the papers! Sign them or he ends this right now!" Simone's response was too quiet to hear, but she saw his hands move, a subtle gesture, fingers splayed, then clenched, then splayed again. He was talking to her, hoping she was there, hoping she'd understand. Melissa moved fast, grabbed a crystal decanter from the bar cart and hurled it across the room. It exploded against the far wall, glass and scotch spraying like shrapnel. The hitman's gun swung toward the sound. Simone moved in the same instant, diving behind his desk. Melissa lunged forward, grabbed his arm, and pulled him toward the sofa as gunfire erupted. The first shot hit where Simone's head had been a second earlier. They crashed behind the furniture together, breathing hard, bodies pressed close. "You came back," Simone whispered, and there was something in his voice she'd never heard before. Wonder, disbelief. Relief so profound it sounded like prayer. "You fired me to save me," Melissa said, her hands shaking as she gripped his shirt. "Your feet were pointed at me. Your hands were clenched. You were restraining yourself, not attacking. I heard what your body was saying even when your mouth was lying." Simone stared at her like she'd just revealed the secret to immortality. "How did you know? How did you read me that clearly?" The fire alarm finally died, killed remotely by someone in security. The sudden silence was deafening. Melissa met his eyes, and in that moment decided to give him the truth she'd been hiding since the beginning. "My parents are deaf, Simone, both of them. I grew up in a household where words were secondary, where every emotion, every truth, every lie was communicated through hands and faces and the space between bodies. I didn't learn body language from you. I've been speaking it since I was born." She watched understanding crash over him like a wave. "You weren't learning from me. You were translating for me. I was confirming what I already knew," Melissa said. "Reading people isn't a skill you taught me. It's the language I think in. And when you screamed at me and threw my bag, your hands were saying something completely different than your mouth. They were saying stay alive. They were saying I love you even if I can't admit it yet." Simone's hand found her face, cradling her jaw like she was something infinitely precious. "You heard all that? Every word your body said?" Another gunshot. Closer. The hitman was circling, trying to get an angle. Julian's voice cut through the tension. "Come out, Baroni. Sign over the strip contracts or we end this now." Melissa could see documents spread across Simone's desk. Transfer deeds, property rights, everything Julian needed to steal the empire he'd been stealing from piece by piece. "He wants the high-stakes room," Simone murmured, his tactical mind already 3 steps ahead. "The billiards lounge. That's where the physical deeds are stored. He needs me alive long enough to access them." Melissa's mind raced. "Then we give him what he wants. We get him to the billiards room. And then we play the game better than he does." She looked at Simone, and something shifted between them. The dynamic that had existed since her fall, teacher and student, boss and employee, it all dissolved. What remained was partnership, equality, two people who spoke the same silent language and were about to use it to destroy their enemies. Simone's lips curved into something predatory. "One last game," he said, his voice carrying that dangerous edge that meant he was about to do something brilliant or insane. "Winner takes all." He stood, hands raised in surrender. "Julian, you want the strip contracts? They're in the billiards vault, but you'll need both my biometrics and the key code to access them. You kill me, you get nothing." There was a pause. Then Julian's voice, suspicious but hungry. "Lead the way. But if you try anything, I won't." Simone looked down at Melissa, and in his eyes she saw everything: trust, respect, and something that looked dangerously close to love. They stood together and walked toward the office door, toward Julian and the hitman and the final confrontation that would either save them or destroy them both. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Melissa wasn't afraid. Because she knew something Julian didn't. She and Simone didn't need words to communicate, and in a game where silence was a weapon, they'd already won before the first move was made. The billiards room occupied the club's west wing, all dark wood paneling and amber lighting that made everything look like it belonged in a film about old money and older sins. The table dominated the center, championship grade. Green felt stretched tight as a drum. Julian gestured toward it with his gun, trying to look confident, but sweating through his shirt. The hitman stood by the door, professional and patient, waiting for his payment to clear before he cared who lived or died. "One game," Julian said, his voice cracking on the edges. "You win. I walk away with nothing. I win. You sign over every property deed you own on the strip." Simone's expression was unreadable. He moved to the table, selected a cue with the casual precision of someone who'd played this game 1,000 times. "Winner takes all," he agreed. Melissa stood near the wall, exactly where Simone had positioned her with the smallest gesture of his hand, close enough to observe, far enough to seem irrelevant. Julian broke. The crack of impact echoed through the room. Balls scattering across felt in patterns that should have been random, but felt wrong. Melissa watched the roll, her mind automatically calculating angles and momentum. Something was off. The balls curved slightly, imperceptibly, like gravity was pulling them at a bias. She shifted her weight, letting her eyes track the table's surface while Julian and Simone traded shots. Standard game. Nothing remarkable. Except Julian kept glancing at his phone between turns, and every time he did, the balls seemed to favor his position just slightly. Melissa's gaze dropped to the floor, found the answer in the carpet's weave. A small ridge, barely visible, running from beneath the table to the corner where Julian stood. She recognized that ridge, had tripped over one exactly like it the night this whole nightmare began. Not a wire this time, a cable. And beneath it, hidden in the floorboard's pattern, she could just make out the edge of a receiver box. The table was hydraulic, remotely controlled. Julian was tilting it with his phone, adjusting the level millimeter by millimeter to bias every shot in his favor. The game progressed. Simone was skilled, but skill meant nothing when physics was rigged. Julian had 2 balls left. Simone had 4. The 8 ball sat near the corner pocket, waiting for Julian's final shot. Victory was a single strike away, and Julian knew it. He lined up, his smile spreading into something ugly and triumphant. Melissa moved. Not toward Julian, not toward the hitman, just a casual shift, walking past the table like she was repositioning to see better. Her heel caught on the carpet ridge, and this time the stumble was completely intentional. She fell forward, arms windmilling for balance she didn't actually need, and her heel came down hard on the floorboard hiding the receiver. The wood cracked. The hydraulic mechanism beneath died with an electronic whine so soft only she and Simone heard it. The table shifted, just barely, just enough. Julian took his shot. The cue ball struck clean, sent the 8 ball rolling toward the pocket with perfect English. But the table was level now, no longer tilted in his favor, and physics told the truth instead of the lie he'd programmed. The 8 ball hit the pocket's edge, bounced out, rolled to a stop 2 inches from victory. The room went silent. Julian stared at the table like it had personally betrayed him. Then his eyes cut to Melissa, and she saw the moment he understood. Saw rage replace confusion. "You," he snarled, reaching for his gun. But before he could clear his jacket, Melissa was already moving to the wall. She grabbed the folder she'd hidden behind a decorative sculpture hours ago, when she'd first broken back into the building through the service entrance. "Actually," she said, her voice steady despite her heart trying to escape her chest. "I win." Julian's gun leveled at her. The hitman shifted, suddenly interested, but Melissa didn't flinch. "I didn't call the police, Julian. I called the escrow firm." She opened the folder, let him see the documents inside. "You falsified collateral for this takeover, used shell companies to inflate your asset value. I have the proof. Bank transfers, falsified property assessments, all of it." Julian's face went white. It triggers an immediate breach of contract clause," Melissa continued, and now her voice carried the same cold precision Simone used when he was dismantling someone's world. "Which means every account you used for this operation, every backer you brought in, all of it freezes instantly. The escrow firm filed the paperwork 20 minutes ago." The hitman's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, looked at Julian, then looked at Simone with something that might have been professional respect. "Payment declined," he said simply, already moving toward the door. "This contract is void." He walked out like he'd never been there at all, and Melissa understood that in his world, loyalty lasted exactly as long as the money cleared. Julian lunged, but Simone was faster. Caught his wrist mid-swing, twisted the gun free, and put Julian on his knees with the kind of efficiency that came from decades of surviving in a world where hesitation meant death. Security arrived within minutes, summoned by Simone with a single text. They dragged Julian away, screaming about lawyers and appeals and conspiracies, but the sound faded fast, swallowed by distance and irrelevance. And then it was just Simone and Melissa, standing in the billiards room that smelled like gun smoke and expensive scotch, breathing hard and alive and victorious. "The roof," Simone said quietly. "I need air." They took the elevator to the highest point the Sovereign Club offered. The roof deck was empty. Just them and Vegas spreading out below in a constellation of neon and sin and endless possibility. The night air was cool against Melissa's overheated skin, carrying the scent of desert and danger and new beginnings. Simone stood at the railing, his profile sharp against the city lights, and pulled something from his pocket. A poker chip, not plastic, real clay and ceramic, marked with the Sovereign's crest, and a denomination that made Melissa's breath catch. $1 million. "You saved my empire," Simone said, holding it out to her. Melissa took the chip, felt its weight in her palm, and looked him directly in the eyes. "I saved our empire." Something shifted in his expression. Recognition. Acceptance. The acknowledgement that she wasn't his assistant or his student or his responsibility. She was his equal, his partner, the person who'd learned to speak his language and then taught him to hear what his own body was saying when his mouth tried to lie. Simone pulled her close, his tattooed hands framing her face with a reverence that made her chest ache. The ink on his neck flexed as he leaned down, muscle and art moving together as he kissed her forehead, her temple, the corner of her mouth where her smile was already forming. "The house always wins," he murmured against her skin. Melissa leaned into him, felt his heartbeat against hers, and finished the thought. "And baby, we are the house." They stood there as Vegas glittered beneath them. Two people who'd survived chaos and betrayal and assassination attempts, who'd learned that true power didn't come from violence or money or fear. It came from seeing what others missed, from reading the invisible, from building something together that couldn't be destroyed because it was founded on the one thing that couldn't be faked. Absolute trust. Simone and Melissa proved that true power isn't about who speaks the loudest, but who sees the invisible. If you felt that tension, if you held your breath through the silence and cheered for a love built on absolute trust, then you are ready for what comes next. There are more stories waiting in the shadows, tales of dangerous men, brilliant women, and the choices that change everything. Subscribe now. Do not let the next secret slip past you.